Here we go. I want to finish up today with a little bit more from Mesopotamian art. And this is one of the big points I want to make here is about how written language was developed in Mesopotamia. And here is a slide. Gideon is seated holding the plan of a temple of modern day Iraq, and it's 40-something hundred years old. I want to kind of bring your attention to this part. This is kind of hard to see, but what we have all over the bottom of this statue is, there's the plan for the temple, and this is writing, and it's called cuneiform writing, and it is a kind of writing that's peculiar to the Middle East, and it's some of the most ancient writing we know about. And I want to add to that is this is partly why when we find artifacts from this area of the world, we have some context to put them in, because this is no longer prehistory, but it is actual history. And so it takes a long time. A lot of times these ancient languages, the language gets lost. It's what they call a dead language, but sometimes it doesn't get lost. How many here know of any dead languages? Yes. Aramaic is one. Yes, absolutely. Good call. And they're finding out today, though, they're reviving it because they're finding some people in Lebanon, in Jordan, and some people that kind of know the old language and stuff. So yeah, they're kind of putting it back together, but it's a language that wasn't used for centuries. Yes. Latin, dead language. That's another dead language. It's kind of dead and it's kind of alive. It's alive in that somewhere along the line, people understood that you could not make new words in Latin because the language was dead. It doesn't grow. English is very alive. In fact, we invent words all of the time. Every year, the dictionary grows with all of the new words. For instance, cell phone. Look in a dictionary from 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Wouldn't have any idea what that is. It's a word that followed the invention. And so there are a lot of things in English as we develop things. Interestingly enough, this is a little sidebar. Most of the time when we have new things, they're named in English. English is pretty huge worldwide. And the French, they meet every year and they try to put French equivalent words to the new English words. You know, like we say compact disc, and they say, look, this compact, something like that. They translate it, they create their own words. Anyway, I'm off on a sidetrack. The Latin is so important because it is a dead language, and so it doesn't grow. And so you can kind of take it apart and put it back together. A lot of things in medicine, a lot of things in biology, a lot of things in the sciences are Latin words. Osteoporosis. Hope you guys don't have that. Bottom line, osteo means bone. Latin. Osteoporosis means that the porosis means that your bones are getting brittle. Just say. Anyway, so this is kind of the sort of the grandparent of written language, at least in the Western world. And moving on, there's Gideon standing over an overflowing water jar. I think I love this sculpture. See that stuff right there? That's the water overflowing. That's kind of odd. So how do you make representations of things that move? And so, yeah, they were trying to tackle some things here. And they came up with this that is probably more symbolic than it is representational, but bottom line is that that's what this is. It's water overflowing the jar, and we see a lot of writing on this statue. And so a lot of this stuff is not just confined to Mesopotamia. A lot of stuff from west of that in Syria and east of that in modern day Iraq, which was called Persia, of course, and still in a lot of places referred to as Persia. And so Queen of the Night from Babylon, and there's a question mark here, and this is kind of an interesting sculpture as well. It kind of brings up more questions than it answers. Painted terracotta. Anybody know what terracotta is? It's clay. Terra. That's a Latin word that means earth. And we get a lot of words from it, like terrain, the earth. Anyway, terracotta is clay. And what this does, though, it brings up some questions because the depiction here looks more like it came from South Asia than the Middle East. If you've ever seen sculpture from India, you'll see that this is much more similar to that style than it is the concurrent styles in Mesopotamia. But Stella with the laws of Hammurabi, and this is like huge. We're talking about the written language. Hammurabi, one of the great kings of Babylon, and you see Iran, Persia. They have a really good write-up on this in the textbook. And it explains that this, in a lot of ways, this is kind of like the foundation for Western jurisprudence, laws. And this is referred to as the Code of Hammurabi, or Hammurabi's laws. And it kind of covers many things dealing with life in an organized society. And it's kind of sexist, but the times were sexist. It talked about paying dowries for brides. You wanted to get, if you were a male and you wanted to get married, You'd find a guy who had some daughters, and if you paid him enough, you could marry his daughter. Not like the women had a whole lot of say in the matter. But if the daughter would not produce a male heir, the guy could go get his dowry back. That's in the laws of Hammurabi. But there are other things in there too that kind of persist today. And a lot of similarities between this culture and some of the things that we find, say, in the Bible. There's a part of this that says if you put someone's eye out, the punishment is that they'll put your eye out. And that comes, you could find it in the Bible as well, and a lot of other religious texts. An eye for an eye. So anyway, this is what they did. This is their legacy. And this is at the Loop. There's another part of this that's kind of interesting I want to bring to your attention. And that is that we got Hammurabi here. And it's not, his face is in profile, which is what you'll see almost all through the ancient world, is that people are depicted from the side. But you see, he's kind of turned, and you can see both of his shoulders. So he's in profile, but he's turned. That's kind of a different thing. It's real different from anything that we've seen prior to that. Shows that they're trying to create some level of naturalism. And so, you know, these things develop slowly, and sometimes little changes become very significant. I wanted to kind of expand just a little bit about this idea of profile. And you can see that. That's, and we're already on Zoom. And you see that. Can't get it any larger, but you see, it's on the side. You see the side of the face. And that was kind of the convention. It is the convention for portraits. Not so much anymore, but for millennia, that's how it was done. And we still do that in some areas. For example, whose face is on a nickel or a penny or a dime or a quarter? We'll go in reverse order. George Washington on the quarter, FDR on the dime, Thomas Jefferson on the nickel, and Abraham Lincoln on a penny, all in profile. So we still do that a lot. It's a convention developed thousands of years ago, and we still find that useful. Second thing, one of the aspects of studying this ancient art that I find very interesting is how these words and these practices kind of survive all of this time and actually get to be used for other things. I'm talking about this as a profile. If you're on Facebook, you have a profile, right? You put who you are, where you live, how many years of education or something on your resume. That's your profile. And the idea is that a profile is something that is easily recognizable, identifies you as you. This is your profile. This is who you are. So these ideas, the words stay the same, and they start to mean different things over the centuries. And so this is a lion's gate. You can see this is in pretty poor shape, but you can see the lions. And it's typical Neolithic architecture. Beaker with animal decoration, painted ceramic, stylized. This is an animal. We can't really determine what kind of animal it is. But anyway, we see these animals across the top too. Again, stylized. You'll find a lot of scholars debate the differences between stylized and naturalized, or naturalism or symbolism. And so that's an ongoing issue in aesthetics. And a lot of people try to ascribe other issues to being stylized or symbolized. And some scholars actually kind of look at that as advanced. Others, not so much. I'm telling you this because you may run into something like that in your research. And so, Lamasu, man-headed winged bull. And so we got wings from birds. We got a bull body. We got a human head. And how do we know? If we didn't know this was from Mesopotamia, how would we know that? Well, a couple of things. First of all, if you take a look at that braided beard, that's a identifying symbol of Mesopotamian art. That goes for Akkadian, that goes for Babylonian, Sumerian, and so on. They all did this. And this perpetuates that idea of animal and man. Did we talk about this last time? Yeah, good. Spider-Man, like a spider, like a human being. And so these things go back. Another interesting part here is that this is something they hadn't quite figured out yet. You couldn't make a statue like this and have it stand on its legs because it would be too heavy. These legs would break off. We'll see how cultures dealt with that as we move through this semester. But how many legs does this winged bull have? Well, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. But if you went around the other side, you would see some more. And they're trying to make it appear so you can see through this big block. And so again, the kinds of things they do to represent the idea, the water overflowing the jar, the idea that this creature has 4 legs and that you can count them from either side. And so Ashur Nasi Pal, Nasser, I always triple. A lot of these names, by the way, are probably a number of words or ideas strung together, which is why they end up being so long. Ashur Nasser Paul. Ashur Nasser Paul. Bottom line, he's a king. We talked about scale. We know this is the king's most well-dressed, but also the tallest. Way bigger, not way bigger, but somewhat bigger than the attendants. And so this guy was a great king, and he had left in the royal palace, his royal palace. All of these friezes, these low relief sculptures, and they depict a lot of different things in the history of Assyria and Assyrian archers pursuing enemies. And you can see them here. They're shooting arrows. They got a problem here in that the castle is like way small. So you have to do some adjustments with scale. And then you got to have the defenders, and you don't want to make them tiny. You want to be able to show who they are and what they're doing. So these kinds of things are really kind of, to me, very interesting. Here's Assyrians besieging an enemy citadel, which is really the same subject matter. Again, large archers, the citadel here, scale out the window. Is it because they didn't know any better? Probably not. It's probably that they had priorities, and it was important for them to show who these defenders were in the enemy citadel. Just saying. And this is in the book. I brought some extra pictures of this, but here you see it's just, less than 700 years BCE. And here he is, Ashurbanipal, wanting to portray himself. I think this is not a stretch, as a very powerful and great ruler. If you want to show, I know it's a sexist, but what's sexist? Manliness. How about taking on some big wild animals? Ugh. There he is. He's hunting lions. And he's got his chariot, he's got his horse, and look at all these dead lions behind him. He's really quite the warrior. We've got another picture here from that same set of friezes where we got a wounded lion and Ashurbanipal being attacked by a wounded lion. If you know anything about hunting and wildlife and stuff like that, you should know that there's an old saying, there's nothing more dangerous than a wounded animal, because the animal has nothing left to lose. And so that's the case here. But you see, the king, he's taking them on, while his attendants watch. He's doing this. This is hand to hand. This is WWF 2,000 years ago. And so, yeah, he is powerful. Somebody asked me yesterday if these kinds of images were propaganda. I didn't even have to think about it. Yes. This is sending a message to the populace, to potential enemies, to anyone. Don't mess with this guy. He's the king. He's bad. So anyway, another part of that frieze and the lion hunt, as it's called. And we see a dead lion here. These guys, that's why I brought this one in. See those round things? Anybody have an idea what those are? Pardon me. Somebody said something. Shields. Yeah, on the face of it, you'd think that that's true. More likely, still use these today in marching band symbols. And when you hunt big game, as they say, when you intrude on the animal's territory, oftentimes their first instinct, unless you're between them and their offspring, their babies, their cubs, is that they'll hide. They're not looking for trouble. And especially if you come in like this guy with a whole bunch of guys and a bunch of horses and stuff that scare the lions into the brush. And then you get these guys here with symbols to go up into the brush and climb these symbols and chase them out. Not that you'll ever use that in a practical way, but it's the same way. When people go, you've got to have money to do this, and there's probably some moral issues involved, but there are people who still do this today. They go to places, they hire guides and an entourage. They go on safari, they go find wild animals and kill them for trophy. And so anyway, another issue here too, and this is kind of cool actually. A lot of ancient art, we can find evidence of species of animals that no longer exist. And these lions, if you talk about Mesopotamia, you won't find lions in that part of the world, partly because they're extinct. And this is an Asiatic lion. I had somebody on the phone looking this up, said they were pronounced extinct at the end of the 19th century. I didn't know they lasted that long, but into the 1800s. But the way this guy's killing them, not surprised. But at any rate, the Asiatic lion, these no longer exist. And we find other things, like in the cave paintings, we find species of bison that we know are bison, but they don't resemble bison we know of. There were herds of bison that roamed through Central Europe for thousands of years, just like they did the plains in North America, two different kinds of bison, but anyway. And the other part I wanted to mention is the artistic skill. This lion, you can see, all of the features are there. And you see the arrows and the blood running and the agony of this poor animal, the dying animal, just about ready to collapse. And in this case, you can see this arrow going all the way through and the blood coming out. So it means to inspire nightmares and bad dreams and stuff. Anyway, here is what this looks like at the Royal Museum in London. And this is just a part of it. Here's a lion hunt. But on that frieze, we got the attacking the enemies in their citadel. So, and again, the braided beard. It's something that comes from Mesopotamia, and it's found frequently in their sculptures and their portraits. Large eyes, talking about being woke, so on. And the Ishtar Gate. Babylon. And this was in poor shape. It's been restored, but they parted it off, and it's in the State Museum in Berlin. But anyway, an idea of the craft, the architectural skills. I always like to point out this about this slide, about this work of art, an archway. That's huge. We talked about post and lintel architecture, and that's just two posts and a lintel over the top. It's very simple, very efficient. This requires a higher degree of mathematical skills. You got to be able to measure this. You got to be able to cut the stones properly. But what you can do is actually support more weight with an archway. Seems counterintuitive, but what you have over, this is the architectural jargon here, but what you have in this length here is much longer than the length between the two. This would be the diameter. This would be radius times pi, I believe. Anyway, it's a much longer distance. And so this distance supports the same weight as a lintel would. But because that weight is distributed around the archway, you can do a lot more, and you can have actually a much larger entryway. Archways are still used today, invented in the Middle East. And so another invention, we talk about post and lintel. We see that a lot of the architecture in Mesopotamia included, here is a post and lintel, but columns. And this is something that will carry over and inspire Egyptian architecture, and it will inspire Greek and Roman architecture. We still use columns today, but in the day, this was high tech. And so anyway, there's a column capital, and that's this part here, the capital, with full protones. And this is what changes over the years, especially in Greek art and architecture. They'll do away with the sculptures. But they'll have other means, other styles of decoration. And so, just wanted to say another archway. And so that's really the end of that. Let me make sure I get this. Ancient Egypt. All I really want to do is preface this a little bit. We'll talk more about that after Labor Day. But it is the next huge empire that we'll look at. And to that end, this is an empire that lasts like 3,000 years. It's amazing. It's long-lived. It's continuous. They have a lot of changes, a lot of upheaval. When we take a look at the map here, you'll see all of these significant places, and they're all along the Nile River. Very important. And what had happened over time is that Pharaoh and the dynasty may have decided, they did decide at a number of points, they would just pack up and build a new capital somewhere else along the Nile. And so we got Luxor and Karnak. Up here we got Memphis and Giza. Giza's where the pyramids are, by the way. And this is the New Kingdom, 1550, 1070 BCE. And so you see this kind of goes out a long ways. What we got here is a situation where we believe that the desert had not encroached so close to the Nile as it is today. If you go to Giza, it's right there at the edge of the desert. The desert had come all the way up to the Nile. But we're finding out through research, through archaeology, that actually we think that the green part of the Nile Valley was much, much bigger. And on top of that, the Sahara Desert is still growing. It's growing every year. It gets hotter and hotter, and bottom line, it's grown to the east. It grows to the south. Places like Sudan, for example, experience the growth, the encroachment of the Sahara Desert coming down. And so anyway, this is Lower Egypt. This is Upper Egypt. I had a question about this. I wonder if you guys, you know why that is? Well, we would think by the conventions of cartography, which is map making, that upper would be here, lower would be there, partly because almost all maps are drawn oriented to the north. But this is all based on the flow of the Nile River, which ends up in southeast central Africa and flows northward, which is kind of different than most of the major rivers of the world. And so this is like upstream and that's downstream, and that's how we did that. Judgment of Hunefer, detailed Book of the Dead. And you see, in some ways, this is very similar to Mesopotamian art. In some ways, very different. We still have these hybrids, people and animals. This one here is called the Anubis, and the Anubis appears in a lot of places in Egyptian art, and he is a guardian, and it's the body of a man, usually very big and strong. And secondly, the head has been talked about, debated, the head of a jackal, or the head of a wolf, or the head of a dog. We don't know, but we know that it is some sort of canine. And the dog argument has everything to do with how loyal dogs are, and that may be the characteristic. Anyway, we see up here a different kind of writing. It's not cuneiform, it's hieroglyphics. And these are pictures that mean different things. Some you can actually pick out. And so looking at this, we can see a scale. We can see an eye. Let me see, I found a bird in here the other day. Yeah, you can kind of pick out little bits and pieces of images. And there's a very interesting story about how we were able to decode hieroglyphs. This is 1290, 1275 BCE. And this is a papyrus scroll, which is something that the Egyptians used. It's kind of a paper made out of papyrus, which is a reed that grows in the Nile Valley. And they put this, they make, it's kind of like cloth is what it's like, but at any rate, papyrus. And what they're doing here, this is a feather, this is Hunifer's heart. And this is like the last judgment. You get to go into the afterlife. In Christianity, we talk about St. Peter. Go to St. Peter, he opens the ledger. Were you good or bad? Judgment day. For you, anyway. Bottom line, as the Book of the Dead has it, they remove your heart. And if it is heavier than a feather, then it means you've had a bad life. And if it's as light as a feather, you will get passage into the afterlife. And so, let me do this. Assignments, quiz 1. Share screen. This one. And let me make sure we're on that. Very good. So Mackenzie, are you still on here?
Yeah, I am.
Can you see quiz 1?
Yes, I can.
Oh, thank you. I messed up the video from Tuesday. I didn't get the last part. If you take a look at it in the media gallery, you'll see I put a notation on there. That's the complete audio, the video part. I lost the screen halfway through the time, so it's just black. And I'm talking to say. But anyway, I have the PowerPoint. And so I promised you guys a quiz, and here are the instructions. There are 2 images on the screen. Write an essay, no more than 2 pages, on one of the artworks. And so either that one or this one. I didn't tell you what they were. You're going to have to find that out. And so you should answer these questions. What is it? Where was it found? What is it made of? And describe this in terms of formal characteristics, which includes what it's made of, the degree of naturalism or symbolism, the size, exaggerated features. I didn't give you the votive statues, the Assyrian votive statues, but they had the eyes. That's symbolism. That's an exaggerated feature. You take a look at all of this stuff, it may or may not apply. other physical and visual characteristics. And so if you do this one, you're going to have to explain what the purpose of this is. If you do the other one, describe what this is and what this means. And that's really what I'm looking for. And it's so that goes to the final part. Why is this artifact important and what does it reveal about the culture of its creation? That's huge. That's it. That's the meaning. And so use online resources to support your answer. And at the bottom of your essay, I want you to put endnotes. And the first endnote entry should be this one. The textbook, Kleiner Fred. Fred S. Gardner's Art Through the Ages, Global History, 16th edition, ebook, ESPN, ISBN, not sports, you know, just saying. And so submit your answer as a docx or PDF. And just upload the file. You'll get the instructions to do that. I will run this through, what they call it, safe check or something. Don't copy wholesale from your sources. You can take little bits and pieces and you can put those in quotes, but don't cut and paste too much. And I'll get a score on this. How much of this is similar to other writing? And typically, it's pretty accurate. If you're in the low numbers, like 20% or less, that's pretty good. You come up in above 50%, that's real problems, and that'll come as a red number on my end. And so anyway, be real careful with that. I want you to cite your sources. I want to show you an example here. This is from a past class, and I asked about this. This was one of the choices, Venus of Willendorf. And I put an example here, and I got to make sure my share is going. Yeah, we're good. And so this one is a little short. It's more one page than two. The image depicted is of Venus of Willendorf, a limestone rock. See what is it made of? How old is it? Tinted with red ochre pigment. It's over 4 inches tall. Describing it. Figure is of a standing obese woman with no emphasis on the arm and feet, with more focus being paid to the shape of the female figure itself herself. Her small, nearly indistinguishable hands rest on her massive breast, and what appears to be a cap, a braid, or a basket covers head and face. Most notably, as in other carvings, genitalia was intentionally carved, unlike many other figurines found from the same period, which did not include them. Now, that's, I don't know, that's yes or no. I had a question about that. But is meant to represent fertility in the female form, which is something that we talked about in here. There's really not any surprises. Its connection to fertility helped archaeologists name it Venus of Willendorf. And that's a little questionable too. Mostly it's not, Venus is not a fertility goddess as much as a goddess of beauty. And so there are other deities in ancient cultures that, could be more about fertility. But bottom line, love and fertility was found in Bellendorf and so on. You can read the rest of this, but there is that first endnote, Gardner's Art Through the Ages. And when you have online sources, if you would just cut and paste from your URL bar up here and put it down here, we're good. I'm not gonna get too picky about things. We'll talk about more credible sources versus less credible sources. But these two are actually pretty good. Britannica is a gold standard. It doesn't get particularly as deep as a lot of other sources, but it's authentic, it's real, it's trustworthy, as is My Modern Met, which is from the Metropolitan Museum in in New York City. I'm sorry, I almost gave away the Met. But it is one of the outstanding museums in the entire world. And so both are good sources. And so that's what I have for you. Do you have questions for me?
What kind of format do you want us to use for like MLA, Chicago?
Well, I just want you to write an essay. Now, we're going to talk about formats a little later on. And Chicago is really the format of choice. And that is the format connected with art history. That's the standard. MLA used pretty much. APA, not so much. But right now, we're still just doing an essay, do some research, put it down, knock around. We'll get more elaborate. So does that answer?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, you bet, Mackenzie. Yeah, and to her question, that was a really good question, I might add, but I'm not always convinced that you got your skills in research formats and stuff like that are probably uneven in here. So we're going to kind of move through this in stages. But right now, use the right words, the proper vocabulary, look at the sources, and put together your ideas. All right, we got about 11 minutes. Do we want to sit around and like twiddle our thumbs? Well, if you don't have any more questions and you don't want to twiddle your thumbs, have a good Labor Day weekend.
Can I talk to you after class?
Yes, is this Mackenzie?
It is.
Okay, good. I'm glad you said something.